Hello gang, and welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be looking at men in tights. I meant pro wrestling. I'm a big fan of wrestling games, and I figured it'd be fun to take a look at one today. This one's for the wrestling fans out there. I'm diving back into a game I haven't played since I was a kid. Smackdown, Here Comes the Pain for the PlayStation 2. Back in the day, I never could have realized the kind of reputation this game would go on to have. But is this a good game? And is it deserving of the reputation that it has gained? Well, let's find out. Like all things, we're going to have to rewind back to the beginning. One console generation prior, the PS1 struggled for a while to have a really great breakout wrestling game, at least in the West. It struggled to have its own identity in the genre. Many of its games were ports or multi-platform games, and even the exclusives it got never really set the world on fire. And the less we say about WCW NWO Thunder, the better.
Go on, go pick somebody else.
By contrast, the N64 had many great exclusives, as Aki Corporation were making banger after banger after banger after banger after banger after banger. Well, to be fair, two of those games were Japan exclusive, and I don't really know much about the Japanese PS1 wrestling games, but still, in the West, N64 players got 4 incredible games. Wrestling fans who owned PS1s worldwide would finally have an exclusive to be proud of when Ukes released WWF Smackdown in 2000, which spawned a series of great games. And just bring it. Well, they can't all be zingers. Fast forward to 2003, WWE is now in a bit of a transitional period. Their two biggest competitors have been out of business for a couple of years now. An influx of talents from those companies have filled their roster up, and many older talents from the Attitude Era like The Rock and Stone Cold are on their way out. And so, we got this game, Here Comes the Pain. It even primarily features Brock Lesnar on the cover instead of older talent. Here Comes the Pain is the final SmackDown game, as the next year saw the start of the new SmackDown vs. Raw series. So how good of a job does this game do of sending the series off to ride off into the sunset? Let's take a look. There's a lot of stuff to look at here. To start with, the SmackDown series was always trying to provide fun gameplay that was easy to pick up and play and fun to master. You'd be able to strike with the X button, grapple with the circle button, run with triangle, and so on, doing different moves by pressing a direction along with the button. You could counter moves with the square button, interact with things like the ring or weapons, and so forth. And the basic idea is to just beat up the other guy until you can pin them, knock them out, or make them submit. Simple, arcadey fun. Here Comes the Pain expands upon the formula, sprinkling in just a dash more realism while keeping the really arcadey fun stuff. Now, by pressing a direction and the grapple button, you can initiate one of 4 different types of lockups, and each wrestler has different moves that they'll employ in these lockups. Someone like The Undertaker will use big power moves, someone like Chris Benoit will use submission moves, and so on. In addition, the submission system and beating up wrestlers in general has gotten heavily overhauled. Now wrestlers have an indicator showing the health of their limbs, and by damaging them you can hurt them enough to beat them. Pins work about the same as always, and KOs are pretty similar, but for submissions, instead of it just being kinda random after you've beaten the other guy up for a while, now you need to get the targeted limb to red health and button mash to get the victory. Making people submit feels so satisfying now that you actually have to do something to make it happen. In addition, rather than just having a single reversal button, L2 counters strikes and R2 counters grapples, giving just a little more depth to that part of the gameplay. These changes come together to give the in-ring action a lot more variety, and all the really cool new moves and stuff really help make each wrestler feel different from one another. But at the same time, these changes don't overly push the game into simulation territory. It's still fundamentally a fun, arcadey game. They also added some new modes and stuff in addition to the great stuff that was already included. This game introduced the Elimination Chamber game mode. Like the real-life match, 6 wrestlers enter. 2 start the match, and the rest enter one at a time in whatever order was set up for the match. Defeating a wrestler eliminates them. The last one standing wins. You can also play this as a 6-man tag match. With the introduction of the health system for limbs, they also introduced blood to this series, although other wrestling games had included blood before this. This brought along another new match type for the series, First Blood, which is exactly what it sounds like. Looking back, WWE from the 2000s probably looks really barbaric from the outside, huh? Alongside these additions, many things return from previous games, like Create a Wrestler, moveset, and animations, and of course, the Season Mode. Where do I even start with the Season Mode? In Season Mode, you pick a wrestler and play through a year of WWE events, starting from the night after WrestleMania and ending at the next year's WrestleMania. Since this was during WWE's first brand split era, Raw and Smackdown are different shows with different wrestlers and championships, giving you a different experience on each show. On top of that, you can mess around with the roster and tag teams before you start the season, so before you've even started playing, you have some options to tweak the experience. Once you start, that's where the fun really begins. You get to do all kinds of stuff, as the game offers varied storylines that change up quite a bit from playthrough to playthrough. The first time, I played a season as Ted DiBiase. I had a singles feud with Vince McMahon at one point, with Vince trying to pull his big bad shenanigans on me. In my second playthrough, I played as Shawn Michaels. I was one half of the tag team champions when Vinnie Mac inevitably showed up and decided to screw me over, and so on. You can accept or decline the chance to wrestle on 2 British exclusive pay-per-view events, potentially have a romance with a diva, get into backstage shenanigans with a varied bunch of wrestlers, and even create a stable to run roughshod over WWE. At any time, you can also visit your general manager. If you're not currently a champion or involved in a storyline, you can jump ship to the other show. You can also request a title shot if you have enough superstar points. Each wrestler starts with a different amount of points. A created wrestler might not have enough to do anything, while a main eventer might immediately be able to get a title shot, possibly for a world title. You win points by winning matches. Playing matches also allows you to earn money, which you can use to buy the in-game unlockables, including alternate costumes, legendary wrestlers, and extra movesets for Create a Wrestler. I'll go more into the legends a little later. Between the various wrestlers and titles, the fun storylines, and the customization available for the mode, Here Comes the Pain offers a very replayable and enjoyable season mode. One nice feature is that when you start a new season, whether you've just finished a playthrough or you're abandoning one to try another wrestler, you get the option to reset your season data to default or to keep it as it was, allowing your WWE to stay continuous with each run. This rewards and encourages replays. Thank goodness, too, because it'll probably take a couple of playthroughs to get everything unlocked. Luckily, season mode stays fun the whole time. It's very engaging and very entertaining. As I mentioned earlier, Here Comes the Pain represents both the real-life WWE and its video games at a bit of a transitional period. A lot of important talents from the early 2000s are here, like John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, and so on, along with older staples like the Dudley Boys and Chris Jericho. Many wrestlers like Rodney Mack, Ultimo Dragon, Sean O'Haire, Scott Steiner, Goldberg, and others weren't in the company for that long, and thus their presence here dates this game to a particular, relatively brief time period. Brock Lesnar today seems inseparable from WWE as a part-timer who appears frequently for big main events, but his first run in the company ended just a few months after this game came out, since he left to go play in the NFL. Similarly, the game includes The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin on the active roster, but this was the last time that would happen. Stone Cold retired that year, and Rock was mainly a Hollywood star by this point. The Undertaker was nearing the end of his weird run as the biker guy, which had been around for a few years but is overall a very short part of his career. And of course, this game introduced Legends to the Smackdown series. Legends later became a big part of SmackDown vs. Raw and continue to be important in the modern 2K series. These Legends are interesting to me because a lot of them are wrestlers from the 80s, when Hulk Hogan was the biggest star in the business. Brother. But Hogan clashed with WWE and had left the company earlier that year. So you have all these Hulkamania era guys like Rowdy Roddy Piper, the Iron Sheik, Ted DiBiase, and so on, but there's no Hogan to feud with them. He is in the files, so they probably wanted to have some classic opponents for him, but without him, some of these inclusions are a little odd. They also include the Road Warriors and the retro old-school zombie Undertaker, which may be a little more timeless, or at least were maybe a little more recognizable to the audiences in 2003. I like the legends that they included. I particularly like the $1 Million Man and LOD and the Undertaker. The legends do seem like they'd probably go over the heads of a lot of this game's audience at the time, and as a 6-year-old playing this back then, they definitely went over my head too. But they're pretty neat. Maybe they got some younger fans curious about the history of our great sport, and that's not a bad thing. There's a good variety of power wrestlers, technicians, dirty cheaters, high flyers, and so on, giving a good mix of options to try. One neat detail they've added is weight detection, meaning smaller wrestlers can't lift big guys like the Big Show. Little aspects like that and the variety of movesets help keep the game fun and replayable. At the beginning of this video, I asked a question about the reputation of this game. Is it as great as people say? Is it truly the greatest wrestling game on the PlayStation 2? Personally, I'm a very big fan of Shut Your Mouth, the immediate predecessor to this game, and I think that's a great game. But this game is even better than that. This roster is more star-studded, even without stars like Hogan. The Legends allow for more fun dream matches than just what was possible with the modern roster, as in Shut Your Mouth. The season mode is very immersive and replayable here, and while Shut Your Mouth's mode was good, this game has it beat. And the gameplay is also a lot better with all the extra little stuff they added to the mechanics while still complementing and containing the arcadey core the series was built on. There's a couple of other contenders I would consider to be in the running for this championship. WWE Smackdown vs. Raw 2006, which came out later, comes to mind. But it's been a very long time since I played it, and so I can't really objectively judge it. And maybe it's unfair to judge a game from a couple of years later against this one in that kind of way. The other big contender for me is Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, an amazing game with a lot of great features. But again, it's a later release. While I'd probably give the nod to that game for the title, it's probably not very fair to compare it considering how much later it came out. But as far as I'm concerned, Here Comes the Pain is one of the greatest wrestling games on the PS2. While I would hesitate to say it's the greatest, it's absolutely in that conversation, and I wouldn't argue with you if you said it was the greatest. This game was something special, and is something special today. It nails everything from the creation modes to season mode to fun gameplay and matches, while having a great roster and successfully building on the Smackdown series' core formula. It's a snapshot of a bygone era, a time that's gone now, but fun to come back to. It never gets old grappling and messing around with stuff. It's a classic, and any PS2 owner with even the slightest interest in wrestling, or at least in wrestling games, should definitely check this out. You'd be really doing yourself a disservice if you skip over this one.